Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 2:30 p.m. and we are live. Thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Jaleesa with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today we have Lainey Harris presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, Lainey is going to review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comments section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes during that Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and legal aid is not representing you at this time. Lainey will go over this in more detail, but please remember to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any specific legal advice to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Lainey to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Our topic is SNAP 101. We're going to cover four main areas involving SNAP benefits. The first is how to apply for SNAP. Second, how to maximize your benefits, how to recertify, and then knowing your rights in SNAP appeals. So first, just so that we're all on the same page, we're going to talk about what SNAP is. It's also known as the Food and Nutrition Services Benefits or Food Stamps Benefits. Excuse me. Sure, why my PowerPoint is flipping. There we go. It's a program that provides low-income households with money each month that they can use to help them purchase food. The money is put on a reusable EBT card, and it can only be used to purchase eligible food items. There are several ways that you can apply for SNAP. You can choose whichever way is easier for you and your household. The first is to apply in person at your local Department of Social Services or DSS office. You can also print out a paper application online or pick up a paper application in the office and submit it by fax or mail to DSS. And then the last option that many people prefer is to apply online through the ePass program. Through that portal, you can apply for SNAP benefits, Medicaid, and other benefits administered by the Department of Social Services. If you choose to apply in person, you do have the right to file an application on the same day that you visit DSS during office hours and to get help with the application if you need it. After you submit an application, you'll likely be interviewed by a caseworker so that they can verify the information that you've provided, and they may ask you to provide verifications or documentation to support what you have put on your application. If you want more information on how to apply, you can visit this website with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. It has really great information on how to apply, what you may be eligible for, as well as some frequently asked questions. It also has the forms themselves available in English and Spanish. There are some basic eligibility rules to receive SNAP benefits. Generally, to be eligible, you need to either be a U.S. citizen or have an eligible immigration status, be a North Carolina resident at the time you apply, and meet certain income rules. I will also flag that for some people, there are work requirements. We'll talk about these a little bit later in the presentation. These work requirements were waived during the COVID-19 public health emergency, but they have now been put back into effect. As far as immigrant eligibility, of course, U.S. citizens are eligible for SNAP benefits, but there are also some categories of immigrants who can receive SNAP. The first are lawful permanent residents. These are generally people who have green cards. They can receive SNAP benefits after they have been in the U.S. for 5 years. So they do have a 5-year waiting period. People who are refugees, people who have been granted asylee status, or Afghan special immigrants and parolees are also eligible for SNAP benefits. This is not an all-encompassing list, so if someone has a different immigration status, they may still be eligible. They would need to apply and give their immigration information to DSS to see if they are eligible. But undocumented folks are not going to be eligible for SNAP benefits. Not everyone in a household has to have an eligible immigration status. You can apply just for the members of the household who do have an eligible immigration status. And DSS cannot require you to provide a social security number for household members who are not applying for SNAP benefits for themselves. This chart shows the income rules. This is the maximum gross income that a household can have based on its size in order to receive SNAP benefits. Many households are what's called categorically eligible. This means that they have income below this 200% of the federal poverty level, and they have no disqualified household members. This is important because for categorically eligible households, there is no asset. So DSS doesn't ask for information about how much money is in bank accounts or how many cars are owned by people in the household. They're just going to be looking at what the monthly income is for the family from pretty much any source. There's also a felony controlled substance ban. So this applies to individuals who committed and were convicted of a offense that was a felony that involved some element of possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance. Those folks are permanently disqualified from SNAP benefits. Even if the felony occurred in another state, they're still going to be permanently disqualified. There is, though, an exception for people who were convicted of certain Class H or Class I felonies in North Carolina. Those people may reestablish eligibility for SNAP after 6 months of when they're released from custody, and if they comply with an area mental health authority for an assessment. Here is more information on the work requirements that I was mentioning a little earlier in our presentation. To continue receiving SNAP benefits, people who are considered able-bodied adults without dependents or ABODs, they must work an average of 20 hours a week or be participating in a work program for 20 hours a week. We'll talk more about what it means to be an able-bodied adult without dependents. But if that is you, you again have to be working an average of 20 hours a week to continue receiving SNAP benefits. If you don't meet those work requirements, you can only get SNAP for any 3 months in a 36-month period. Those 20 hours a week can be employment, self-employment, volunteer work, work in exchange for goods or services, or any combination of these. So if someone has a part-time job working 10 hours a week, and then maybe they do some self-employment, they drive for a rideshare company for another 10 hours a week, because that adds up to 20, it does meet the work requirement, even though it's separate jobs and employment. And it doesn't really matter how much you are making as long as you're working the required hours. So for example, if someone babysits for a family member for 20 hours a week, they may not be making much money. They may be making less than minimum wage because it's a family member, but it doesn't matter that it's less than minimum wage. It only matters that it's at least 20 hours a week. So those individuals would still be meeting the work requirements. And usually a letter from the family member confirming that they do babysit for that amount of time is sufficient to meet the work requirements. There's also a good cause exception for people who would have normally met the work requirements in a month, but missed some work for a good cause. If that's the case, DSS will consider them to have met the work requirements as long as their absence from work was just temporary and they kept their job. So this could be a temporary illness, a household emergency, loss of transportation temporarily, things that generally aren't the household's fault. As long as they keep their job, they are deemed to have met the work requirements. So these are exceptions and exemptions to the SNAP work requirement. So these are people who are not even considered able-bodied adults without dependents, and so they don't have to meet the work requirements. So the first is just based off of age. People who are under 18 years old or at least 55 years old don't have to meet the work requirements. Also, if you are within a SNAP household that contains a member under age 18, you do not have to meet the work requirements. For this exception, it doesn't matter whether you are like the parent of the minor or even related to them at all. As long as you're within the same SNAP household, you are considered exempt. So for example, if there's a family with 2 parents and 2 children in the household, let's say one of the children is 16, the other child is 19, that 16-year-old will make everyone in the household exempt from the SNAP work requirements, including their sibling. So as long as they're within the SNAP household, they cover everyone else. People who are pregnant or homeless are also exempt from work requirements. Veterans, regardless of the conditions of their discharge, are also exempt. People who are between the ages of 18 and 24, who were also in foster care when they turned 18, are exempt from the work requirements through age 24. And then people who are considered unfit for employment also do not have to meet the work requirements. So this is a broad category that includes people who are receiving workers' compensation, disability benefits, or Medicaid based on a disability, as well as people who have been medically certified by their doctor as unfit for employment. There is a form that DSS has that they can provide to an applicant to have their doctor sign, saying that they are unable medically to work for 20 hours a week. These are people who may be unable to work due to alcohol or drug addiction, or if they are at least a half-time student. But just as a warning, there are some other special rules that apply that can make it difficult for college students to get SNAP benefits. There's some additional requirements for them. And then the last is just people who are obviously unfit for work based on the caseworker's observation or judgment. They do not have to meet the work requirements. And so if you are an able-bodied adult without dependents, it's very important for you to report your work activity to DSS. Or if you believe that you meet an exemption, you should report that to DSS. I always want to remind people to make sure that DSS has your correct and updated information. So if you've moved, if your phone number has changed, you want to let DSS know so that you can continue to receive important letters and communication from them. If you've recently started work, maybe that can make you comply with the work requirements when you didn't before, so that's a good thing to report. Or if you think you now meet an exemption, like living with a minor or being pregnant. Now we're going to talk about maximizing your SNAP benefits to make sure you get all the SNAP dollars that you're entitled to. So this chart shows the maximum benefit by household size. It's important to remember, though, that not all households receive the same amount and not all households receive the maximum. Your county Department of Social Services will determine your household's monthly SNAP benefit based on income, household size, and certain expenses. Not all expenses, but there are some expenses that DSS will take into account. They'll use a formula to determine exactly how much your household is eligible for in SNAP. And when I say household, that generally means people who live together and buy or cook food together. Higher monthly income means the household receives less SNAP benefits. But if that household has higher of the monthly expenses that DSS considers, they may be eligible to receive more SNAP benefits because their expenses are so high. Again, though, up to that maximum amount by household size. So now we're going to talk about expense verifications and different kinds of verifications that may be requested. There are 2 main types, required and recommended. Required verifications are necessary to determine eligibility, while recommended verifications are just optional, and those are used to determine benefit levels. You generally have to provide required verifications in order for DSS to process your application and approve you for SNAP benefits. If you don't provide the required verifications within the time limit that's allowed, your application may be denied and you may have to reapply. While you don't have to provide recommended verifications, it's generally in your best interest to provide them. Providing those recommended verifications helps to ensure that you get all the SNAP benefits that you're entitled to, because those verifications are used generally to determine your expenses. So, for example, when we talk about required verifications, that could be things like proof of identity, proof of citizenship or immigration status, proof of household size or who's in the household, Social Security number, if requested, but again, only for those applying, and proof of income. Recommended verifications include utilities expenses, not really so much how much you pay in utilities, but proof of which utilities you pay. That's generally the most important thing that they consider with utilities. Mortgage or rental expenses, proof of property taxes and insurance, medical expenses, out-of-pocket medical expenses for older individuals or people with disabilities, child support payments that someone in the household pays for a child who is not in that household, and childcare expenses that are incurred for someone in the household to work. Those are all expenses that DSS will take into account when determining a household SNAP amount. Our next topic is recertifying for SNAP benefits. Most SNAP households have to recertify for SNAP benefits every 6 months. Generally, the process starts when DSS mails the household a recertification form. That form then has to be returned to DSS by the 15th day of the last month of the certification period. Failure to provide it by that day can result in a lapse in benefits, and if you wait too long, you may have to completely reapply for SNAP. Best practice is to submit all required and recommended verifications at the same time, again, by the 15th day of the last month of the certification period. So that can be a little confusing, so we're going to talk about this example here. So we're going to talk about Julie's household. We're going to assume that they're certified for SNAP benefits from January 1st to June 30th. So they'll receive SNAP benefits for that 6-month period from January to June. In either late May or early June at the latest, the household should receive the recertification form in the mail. It looks a lot like an application, and it asks a lot of the same questions about income, who lives in the household, and expenses. In order for their recertification to be timely, DSS has to have Julie's recertification in their possession by June 15th, because remember, June is the last month of their certification period. And again, that's in the possession of DSS. And so if you mail it on the 15th, even though it's postmarked the 15th, it's still going to be considered untimely because it wasn't actually in DSS's possession. So you do have the option to provide it in person or put it in a Dropbox at DSS instead of mailing if you're concerned about that. So you can see here, if it's received by the 15th, it's timely. If it's received by the end of the last month of certification, it's untimely, but can still be processed. And then it's late if it's received in the month after the last month of certification. That's really when you're looking at a potential lapse in benefits, because if you don't turn the recertification in until the next month, you're probably not going to get SNAP benefits for that month. And it may be the month after that before you start to get your SNAP benefits again. So just be aware of that. If you fail to turn your recertification in until 2 months after your certification period ends, at that point, it generally is too late and you will have to do a new application instead of trying to recertify. There are certain changes that have to be reported during your 6-month certification period. The household has to report if someone who is an able-bodied adult without dependents stops working 20 hours a week, or again, an average of 80 hours a month. If anyone in the SNAP household receives lottery or gambling winnings of $4,250 or more, or if the household's income goes above 130% of the federal poverty level. Those folks generally are still eligible, even if they're above 130% of the federal poverty level, but they're required to report the change, and their benefits will likely be recalculated. When DSS approves a household for SNAP benefits, they send out a form with a chart that says what that 130% level number is for the household. It's important to take a look at that and know what the cutoff is that requires you to report a change in income. The household is not required to report an increase in expenses or a decrease in income, because you only have to report these three things. But reporting an increase in expenses or a decrease in income may increase your SNAP benefits, because those are things that could result in a higher SNAP allotment. So it may be in your best interest to go ahead and report instead of waiting until your next recertification. Our last topic is SNAP appeals and knowing your rights in the appeals process. So the most important thing to remember is that you have appeal rights. If you disagree with an action taken by DSS that impacts your SNAP benefits, you likely have appeal rights. And when I say appeal, I just mean you're requesting a hearing, you are asking for an opportunity to explain your situation to someone else at DSS and try to have them make a different decision. You should read all written notices from DSS very carefully. If it's an action that you can appeal, the letter will explain your appeal rights and the deadline to appeal. There are two main types of SNAP hearings. The first are state fair hearings. These cover issues about eligibility, benefit amounts, and overpayments. And then the second are administrative disqualification hearings, and these are only used for intentional program violations, IPVs, which are commonly referred to as fraud cases. So again, these state fair hearings, they have to be provided to a household that's negatively impacted by a DSS action that impacts their participation in SNAP. So these would be things like DSS saying that you're no longer eligible or that your benefits are going to be reduced. Those are things that you can appeal and have a hearing on. If you would like to appeal, you should make a clear statement. It can be either oral or written to DSS that you want to present your case to a higher authority. That's all you have to do, and then they will schedule the hearing. Generally, an appeal or request for hearing must be made within 90 calendar days of the date on the DSS notice. But again, read your notice very carefully because it should tell you exactly when that deadline is. In many cases, DSS must continue SNAP benefits at the prior level if the hearing request is made within 10 days. And these hearings are conducted by a state hearing officer with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So it's not your caseworker who's making the decision or even someone else at your local DSS office. It is someone who works for the state in Raleigh who will make the decision in these hearings. And they're usually conducted over the phone, so you don't have to travel for them. Now, these administrative disqualification hearings are different. They're generally more serious. They're used only when DSS believes that it has clear and convincing evidence that someone has committed an intentional program violation or an IPV. This occurs when a SNAP household member knowingly, willfully, and with deceitful intent commits a fraudulent act, which includes things like making false statements or hiding information to get SNAP benefits that the household is not eligible for, misusing an EBT card, including selling or trading SNAP benefits, or using SNAP benefits to buy food for or share food with someone not in the SNAP household. These are all things that can be considered intentional program violations. If DSS believes the household has committed an intentional program violation, they'll receive notice from DSS, and that notice will tell them the date for their local disqualification hearing. DSS usually includes a waiver form with this notice that says that you can just agree to waive the disqualification hearing and accept the consequences if you want to instead of going to the hearing. But keep in mind that you do not have to sign this waiver. It's your choice whether to sign it or not, but definitely make sure that you understand all of the consequences of signing the waiver before you do so. If you do choose to have a hearing, the hearing officer for the local disqualification hearings will be someone at DSS who has not been previously involved in your case. At the hearing, DSS will present whatever evidence they have of why they think the household has committed an intentional program violation, and then the household will have an opportunity to respond to that evidence or present their own evidence. After the hearing officer must provide the household with a copy of the decision. It often comes by certified mail, and the household has 15 calendar days from the date of the decision to appeal if they're unhappy with the decision. After the appeal, the household then has a brand new hearing with a hearing officer from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. At that hearing, it really doesn't matter what happened at the prior hearing. It's an entirely new hearing where all the evidence is presented again and a new decision is made. There are some pretty serious consequences to an intentional program violation. If it's the individual's first program violation, they are disqualified for SNAP benefits for 12 months. If it is their second program violation, they're disqualified for SNAP for 24 months. And if it's their third program violation, they will be permanently disqualified from SNAP benefits across all states. There's a special category for people who misrepresent their residence and/or their identity to receive multiple benefits across multiple states. Those individuals can receive a 10-year SNAP disqualification. I will point out, though, that the disqualification only applies to the person who actually committed the program violation. So other people in the household can still receive SNAP benefits. It doesn't disqualify the entire household, just the person who actually committed the program violation. Additionally, all adult members of the SNAP household may be jointly responsible for paying back the SNAP benefits that the household should not have received. Households do have rights during the hearing process for intentional program violations. Before the hearing, the household or its representative has a right to review the case file and records that DSS plans to use at the hearing. The household can choose to represent themselves, get legal counsel, or have another person represent them. The household can bring their own witnesses and submit any evidence, such as records, receipts, or other statements that they believe help explain their case. The household can question or challenge any testimony or evidence presented by DSS, and the household can also request a postponement or continuance of up to 30 days if they need more time to prepare or try to get legal counsel. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So here, there's information on how to contact legal aid. If you have a SNAP issue that you believe you need legal representation with, you can contact our helpline, apply online, or use our senior legal helpline if you are 60 or older. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any. Again, I can't give you specific advice on your situation because I'm not representing you. If you need specific advice, you should contact our helpline so that we can see whether we can open a file for you. But if you just have a question about the information presented or want clarification on anything, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Okay, and now we're going to open it up for questions. I just want to remind everyone that you cannot unmute in this forum. And if you do have a question, you would need to type it in the Q&A section on Zoom, or the comment section on Facebook. And with that being said, our first question is if the individual cannot work due to alcohol or substance use, would the individual have to get an assessment before the SNAPs are obtained?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that goes back to the form that I was talking about, that DSS can give someone to have them be medically certified as unfit for employment. So that form has a box on it where the medical provider can check a box saying that the person is unable to work due to alcohol or substance abuse, so that they can prove that to DSS. If it's a case where the person falls into the category of having a felony conviction that involves substance use or possession. In that case, there is the exception for the people who have to get an assessment before they can get SNAP benefits if they have a felony charge. But if that's not the situation and they just can't work due to alcohol or substance abuse, generally some sort of form or letter from a medical provider saying that is sufficient.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. I will just take a few moments to see if any additional questions come in. Okay, not seeing any additional questions. Thank you all for joining us today, and a special thanks to Lainey for presenting. If you would like to review anything we talked about today, we have posted the recording of today's event to our Facebook. It will be immediately available. You can access this with or without a Facebook account at www.facebook.com/legalaidnc. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn presentations, such as expunction, Medicaid, and Social Security, you can do so on our website, legalaidnc.org/clinics. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.